Okay, so we are back. Jumping right into this today. What do we got? We got Kevin O'Regan, J. Kevin O'Regan. Um, what it is like explained in terms of loss in controlled body movements. This from TSC 2023. Taramina, the science of consciousness towards the science of consciousness, whichever one you want to call it. The 2023. So this is last year. Okay, interesting. So obviously, I'm familiar with O'Regan's work. I actually had to reread his book recently. Why Red Doesn't Sound Like a Bell, or whatever it's called. Um, and I found the sensory motor approach very interesting. I don't know that I find myself convinced that they deliver on their promises of dissolving the heart problem. That's what it says down here. Can you see my cursor here? I don't know. Down here, sensory motor approach to understanding phenomenal consciousness bridges the explanatory gap and dissolves the hard problem by adopting a different metaphysical point of view than most other theories. Okay, those are big selling points. So let's jump right into this. See what's going on.
Okay, hello. So this talk is about new developments in the
Huh? Oh, we got it.
sensory motor theory of phenomenal consciousness. And I'm going to try and explain why people say that there's something it's like to have a conscious
What was
experience.
that? May
Why people
14th.
say
May.
that there's something it's like to have a conscious experience.
All right, I was
Sensory
reading. I
motor
didn't listen.
theory
Sorry, last time on Ren, what do you say? Want to explain why they say?
of phenomenal consciousness.
Wait.
Okay, hello. So this talk is about new developments in the sensory motor theory of phenomenal consciousness. And I'm going to try and explain why people say that there's something it's like to have a conscious experience.
See, I'm already suspicious why they say there's something it's like, as opposed to why there is something it's like. I don't really like the. I mean, I do think we want to explain why people say that, but if the part of the explanation doesn't involve that there's consciousness, then I don't like it. So, um, let's see what he's going to say.
Now, something it's like is considered to be perhaps the greatest mystery in consciousness research. Researchers have come up with all sorts of theories about how this could come about. But in my opinion, none of them have presented any intelligible link to, is it too soft? There's no intelligible link to the real phenomenology of something it's like. There seems to be an explanatory gap, so much so that many scientists appeal to dualist type theories. Sensory motor theory proposes a metaphysical shift. Surely, claiming that we all know what we mean by something it's like is not enough to do science. To do science, we must ask what people mean when they say that there's something it's like. We must divide and conquer. We must decompose something it's like into a collection of describable properties. This project I call an analytical phenomenology.
Interesting.
When we do this, something it's like is seen to be a collection of capacities instead of a single magical thing. The explanatory gap and the hard problem evaporate. A similar thing happened at the beginning of the 20th century for the concept of life. As Anil Seth mentioned, the concept of life was de-reified, i.e. it was no longer considered to be a single coherent entity. I think sensory motor theory should propose
Single coherent entity. Mm-hmm. Because life was considered, as he says on the slide, to be the result of a vital spirit. Instead, we think of it as a collection of capacities now. The capacity for self reproduction, maintaining your bodily integrity, homeostasis is that called? Whatever. So these things um, Okay, so capacity. So, I don't know. People still seem to find life pretty mysterious. I guess the point that these guys always make is that the scientists don't find it mysterious. Um, but it's not 100% clear to what extent it is not mysterious, as we saw from watching, or maybe you didn't watch the whole Richard Dawkins discussion with Brian Greene. Um, it's still an open question to what extent life is a singular event on Earth, for sure. Okay, so a set of capacities rather than a single magical thing. Okay, well, no one thinks it's a single magical thing, just that there is something that it is like, and then we want to characterize it and say what it is. Okay, so this is an interesting way of putting it, as opposed to think of it as something we're directly acquainted with or immediately aware of. Huh. Well, I am interested to see where this goes.
A similar de-reification of consciousness. So to take a concrete example, let's take the example of feeling the softness of a sponge. When I say, well, we have to ask what people mean when they say that there's something it's like to feel the softness. And when I say, what do people mean? I'm talking about normal, naive adults. Philosophers may mean strange things when they talk about consciousness. And here also I'll be talking about what people mean as adults about consciousness. I'm not talking about children, and I'm not talking, let's say babies. I'm not talking about animals, and not talking about machines. We can talk about that some other time. So when we think about this, the first thing that seems obvious is that when we say that it feels like something, then there must be a person with sufficient cognitive capacities to be able to know that currently they're interacting with a sponge in a soft way. In other words, there must be a self. Now, I'm not talking about a minimal kind of self, a pre-reflective kind of self. I'm talking about a socio-cognitive construct like philosophers like Dennett and others have suggested, a construct which is of a cognitive type.
So the minimal self, who is he? You had Metzinger here. I guess Metzinger has levels of the self. Um, yeah, I should watch something from Metzinger. That's a guy. He's an interesting guy. Anyway, okay, so what do people mean? He has it capitalized when they say there's something it's like to consciously feel the softness. Okay, so not philosophers, but well, it means when you squish it, it'll feel a certain way. Okay.
May also be of a social kind, as suggested by social scientists, like, for example, Wolfgang Prinz, Ian Hacking, and even some neuroscientists like Michael Graziano have proposed scientific approaches to the notion of self. So I think the self is not a mysterious thing, and I'm going to leave that aside. Another thing that we imply when we say we're conscious of the softness is that we are cognitively accessing the fact that it's soft. Okay? Now, this cognitive access has also been discussed in scientific ways. There's a higher order thought theory, for example, that emphasizes the hierarchical aspect of this knowing that you know that you know. And then global workspace theories have emphasized the fact that you need to have information which is somehow globally available to do this. And then predictive processing theories have also mentioned the importance of higher order knowledge, combining with lower order knowledge, making predictions. So all these three components are receiving currently scientific approaches, and I think that this can be solved and it's not mysterious. But where...
Okay, what can be solved? So wait, so these things he thinks are elements of what people mean when they say there's a softness of the sponge. I'm kind of confused by what he's saying here. So these things might not be, I might disagree with the way he characterized higher order theories, by the way, but that's a different issue. Okay. Interesting. Let me hear what he just said again.
Making predictions. So all these three components are receiving currently scientific approaches, and I think that this can be solved and it's not mysterious. But where there may be a little bit of a mystery is in the quality of the redness of red, or in this case, the quality of the felt softness. And this is where sensory
Oh,
motor.
I see. Is he trying to make a distinction between the hard and the easy problem? So this stuff is the easy stuff? Okay.
Theory has an original contribution. Okay? Sensory motor theory asks, what are we actually doing when we're feeling the softness? Answer, we're probing. We're mentally and physically testing whether the sponge is soft. I press and it squishes. That is what it means to feel softness, to be.
I press and it squishes. That's what it means to feel softness. I mean, in a sense, I get what he's saying. And I don't disagree. But how does this help with the heart problem? Like, why does it, when you are having that capacity to squish it, why does it result in feeling a certain way as opposed to it just, I mean, can't a robot squish in this way as well?
In the state of mind such that I know that currently if I press, it squishes. It's a sensory motor law. The quality of softness lies in that sensory motor law.
I mean, I could understand what he's saying, that what it means to be squishy is this kind of thing. But how does that have to do with the experience? Like that, what it's like business, that there's something that it's like to feel squishy. Can't I have squishiness in my dreams? Huh. Yeah, well, let's go on.
Of course, softness is never felt all by itself. Softness is always accompanied by a number of other feels, like, for example, the springiness, the roughness of the sponge, etc., and even much more general aspects, such as the fact that it's a tactile sensation rather than, let's say, a visual or auditory sensation. But the thing is that all those aspects of my feel are sensory motor laws. They're things, they're ways of doing things. They're laws that describe my current mode of interaction with the sponge. So they're all types of ongoing probing. They're all sensory motor laws. Now, would you say that the feel of softness was generated by the brain? Now, this question doesn't seem to make sense from a sensory motor point of view, because softness is not the kind of thing that's generated in my brain, okay? Softness is a word that describes how I am currently interacting with a sponge. It's a
Right, that's what softness is, but what's the feeling of it? Like the experience of softness, in this sense in which you could have it in the dream. I mean, it is interesting to think about like invert cases in this way. So when you squish something, there is a certain feel to it, an experience. And when you try to squish something and it's solid, there's a, so here's a squishy thing and here's a solid thing. Could those be reversed in the sense of when I press and feel the give, the squishiness, could that occur when I am pressing on something that's not squishy in that sense? But functionally everything else be the same, like a real invert case? Huh. Okay. So I could see sensory motor accounts as an account of the sensory quality and how they're a different account than you have a mental quality in the mind that's representing the squishiness or whatever. The squishiness is your interaction with the thing. Cool. But where's the consciousness bit? Let's see if he's going to get to that.
Safe to go looking in the brain to understand why I feel that it's soft rather than hard, because it lies in what I'm doing. And the same for these other accompanying fields. Thinking this way about softness is a way of escaping from the explanatory gap, because it's a way of escaping from the idea that we need to find a brain mechanism that's generating the softness. Softness is a non-mysterious fact about how you interact with soft things.
I don't think that escapes it, though, because the hard problem is why. So, why is the experience associated with the physical activity associated with that physical activity as opposed to none at all? So this activity, whatever it is, which is associated with squishing, in fact, the squishiness of the thing itself. So does this really even address the question? Huh. I mean, I see all these people trying to say they can solve the hard problem. Are they missing the point in a way? Okay, hold on. Let's continue.
And that can be talked about in everyday language. There is no explanatory gap. So because of the advantage in bridging the explanatory...
Wait, how is there no explanatory gap? Does he deny that there's can you not do this unconsciously? I mean, I still think you can. Like, suppose, you're talking to your friend, you're arguing about philosophy, and then you reach for your cup of green juice, and, well, you know how hard or soft it is because you're pressing the right amount. You're not squeezing into it too hard, too soft. You may grip it and or even as you're holding it, have you ever had that experience where you like forget about what you're holding and then it kind of falls because you're not keep maintaining that pressure? So we are like maintaining a grip on things even when we're focused on something else. So there's my squishy interaction, or in this case, solid. But is there something that it's like for me to do that? So yeah, I think that even if you bought this stuff, how does it get us out of the hard problem? That's what I'm not seeing. I think it seems to me that like what people like O'Regan think is like, okay, so the mystery is that you put all of this stuff, which is complicated, into something simple, and then you ask, gee, how could it be? But of course, it's a bit like um, when people try to argue against evolution by saying, oh, it's as unlikely as a hurricane going through a junkyard and then an airplane being assembled. I think that's a classic. Does that come from Richard Dawkins? I forget, but anyways, from some classic discussion of this stuff. And the answer to it is it's more like, finding a penny one at a time over a long period of time and then getting $1 million. So it's a bunch of small, seemingly meaningless one penny finding things over a large period of time that explains these radical changes from junk to airplane, so to speak. But if you just consider it all at once, it seems very unlikely. So maybe the idea is similar, that if you just think about like our sensory qualities as these mysterious things, black boxes, then it would be hard to relate them to any physical functioning. But if you think of them as instead involving these capacities, then you could see how physical things could do that. And I agree that I think I can see how a physical system could like determine the right way to squeeze. Oh, here's my squishy thing. How did I not even bring out my squishy brain that I have here? Can you guys hear that? Squishy brain. So the squishiness of this made me forget what I was talking about. But anyway, so yeah, I think I can see how a physical system could determine how hard to grip that and how much it could press it and stuff like that. But where does the experience come from? And how does this help us understand how the experiential nature, the squishing, comes from the fact that I have a capacity to press on it? Because it doesn't seem obvious to me. And if that's really so, if really the only thing they got is like, oh, well, there's one thing, this thing is more complicated, then it still seems like the more complicated thing, no matter how complicated it is, and whether it's, involving the object or not, you're still going to have this question of why the experiential nature is associated with that, as opposed to it being absent or associated with a different capacity set. So I don't really see how this gets us out of the puzzle, even though I see how it's an interesting debate about what the sensory qualities are. Are they in effect, as he's going to talk about here, at least that Bergil stuff. So let him get back to it. So see if I can work my way out of this.
Gap for softness, no explanatory gap. So because of the advantage in bridging the explanatory gap for softness, sensory motor theory takes the wager to try and account for all experiences in the same way. A similar idea was actually suggested.
It doesn't really bridge the explanatory gap, does it? Oh, I hate to keep harping on this, but it's like the explanatory gap is the idea that in the cases of water and H2O, when you explain what H2O does, you see an explanation of what water does there already. When H2O is in this solid state, you can understand why ice is a solid. Okay, it makes it intelligible. But here, I see what he's saying. We can explain why you interact with the squishy object. But how does that make it intelligible why the experience is that way? I mean, that just begs the question against the hard problem, which is says take any physical description and then ask the question, why is there an experience associated with that? And I don't see how this really gets us any purchase on that. Unless you're, well, maybe, okay, well, let me be quiet for a second and let him continue.
By Nick Humphrey a long time ago in his adverbial approach to sensation. Now, this seems to make sense for softness. I can convince many people that what I've said makes sense about softness. But what about the redness of red? And what about the hurt of pain? It seems much harder to account for these things as things that you do. But given the advantage in bridging the explanatory gap, let's try. And over the last decades with my colleagues, I've been trying to apply this approach to all experiences. And I've had some success. And the success that I'm most excited about is color, the redness of red. Okay? So what did we do to cast the redness of red in sensory motor terms? What we did is we considered that the feel of red is not something that you passively receive. The feel of red lies in how different colored surfaces modify the light coming into your eye when you move the surfaces around under different illuminations. And it turns out that you can mathematically describe that law as a 3x3 matrix that you can calculate objectively by combining the spectral absorption of the 3 human photoreceptor types and the surface reflectances of different colored surfaces. When you do that, and you look at the resultant 3x3 matrices for all colors, you find that there are 4 colors, red, yellow, green, and blue, that have very special properties. The matrices that correspond to those colors are what mathematicians call singular. singular matrices have the property that the law that they describe is much simpler than all other laws. And using this idea, we were able to precisely define those particular hues of red, yellow, green, and blue that were those hues that were universally named in all cultures throughout the world. Precisely determined those hues. And we were also able to precisely predict psychophysical measurements done on people, asking them to determine which hues they thought were pure and unique. So we were very proud of that because it was what I called a victory of philosophy over science. A simple idea predicted so precisely something that psychophysicists and anthropologists were not able to predict so accurately. Now there are other applications.
That is an interesting idea, but again, I don't think it really addresses the hard problem at all. So basically, I think what he's explaining is that what it is to sense or perceive red is more complicated than merely having a state in the brain represent. Although there are those who argue that we see more similarities between the internal brain states, which map onto the color distinctions in ways that don't map onto the physical stimuli. But anyway, so I think there's an interesting debate here about which way we want to go. However, does any of this have anything to do with quality inversion or zombies or any of the things which the hard problem is typically invoked in the name of? So couldn't you have a sensory motor zombie? What is he trying to say? That's you can't? Like, I don't understand that. So you could certainly, it seems to me, have sensory motor inverts in the kinds that are traditional in philosophy. These special colors could be rotated phenomenologically. Why not? I don't see anything in this discussion, and I don't mean to hate on it. I sound like a hater. I just don't see how it solves the problem of the explanatory gap. So you can say why a certain set of stimuli will affect us behaviorally in a certain way, and it depends on us moving around, perhaps, maybe not. But what does it have to do with the way red, what it's like, the redness of red? But anyway, I like the defense of philosophy, but I'm not really all that interested in rah-rah on either side. I like to say great. But yes, people who do disparage philosophy, this is interesting, I guess.
Of sensory motor theory. In addition to color naming, we've done work on change blindness. It showed the feasibility of sensory substitution. I've been doing work on the rubber hand illusion and also work on the development of notions of space. All to say that sensory motor approach is not just philosophy. It makes predictions and stimulates new research. But let me come back to what people mean when they say that there's something it's like to consciously feel the softness of a sponge. Have I dealt with everything? Is there perhaps something missing? Is there an ultimate something it's likeness?
Yes.
Some kind of hard to define something it's like that makes experienced rather than feeling like nothing at all. Now,
that's what some of these theories over here were supposed to be theories of. Where were they? Whatever, he had it on this slide. Oh, geez, I don't want to go all the way back. But the goal workspace, higher order theory. So as I think of higher order approaches, they are aiming to explain phenomenal consciousness. That's what we're trying to give an account of what it's like in terms of my representing myself as being in various first order states. So you may not think that captures what it's like or that there's more to it or whatever, but that's what we're trying to explain. So yes, the extra thing is that you might have these things and not experience them. And what we want is an answer to the question. By the way, I'm not a higher order theorist for anyone who doesn't know me. I mean, maybe I am, but maybe I'm not, in the sense that I don't accept it as true. I think of it as an interesting option and one which is unduly objected to by many people. But okay, so yes, let's hear what he's going to say.
Is there an ultimate something it's likeness? Some kind of hard to define something it's like that makes experience
I mean, it's hard to define, but it's right there in front of your face, even now as you listen to this video. Consciousness, man.
experienced rather than feeling like nothing at all. Now,
Yeah.
as scientists, to advance, we need to probe deeper. We can't just shrug our shoulders and say, well, we all know what that means. We have to know what we mean when we say it's experienced. So let's try brainstorming some other words to describe better what we might mean. So for example, you could perhaps say that things that are experienced feel like they're ongoing or occurrent or real or lived, or they affect us at a locus, for example, in the world or on our body or in our body or in our minds or as people. They impose themselves on us, they are felt, they occupy us, they are present to us, they're displayed to us. All of these are terms that could be used to perhaps make more precise what we mean when we say there's something it's like. What I'm going to do now is try and show you how we can find some objective sensory motor laws that perhaps explain this first feeling of ongoingness, occurrence, and realness and livedness. So, to proceed, let's think about what the man in the street means when he says, it was a real experience, that bicycle ride I took down the mountain path. What does he mean? I think it's a question of control. It means that you're actively engaged in interacting with the bicycle and the world, but you're only partially in control. There's lots of fast, ongoing give and take between you and the bicycle and the world, but unpredictable things must also be happening.
Right. And the point is that that's the experiential quality, the nature of it is like, so this focus on the man on the street and what they mean. I mean, what is this supposed to do in the dialectic? It just sounds like he's not really dealing with the hard problem face on. I would say the hard problem is very simple. There's consciousness. There's something that it's like to see red. For example, red is more similar to pink than it is to green. It's also a warm color. It's not cool. It's also a color that I enjoy when mixed with other colors like blue and black, etc. So we can all form a kind of association of what it's like. We can't maybe be too precise about it, but it's there. Okay. So then we want to know what's the physical basis of that stuff. So we tell some stories about states and minds and blah, blah, looking brains and so forth. So this stuff about control and all that stuff, I think, is a part of what it's like. And these are important insights. But that doesn't dissolve the explanatory gap between explaining how you're able to do that stuff on the bike and the feeling, which no matter how much you want to explain it away, is there and has to be dealt with, I think. So, yeah, interesting. Okay.
So let's try and be more precise. Let's see how this could be scientifically treated. Let's make a graph. Okay, the y-axis here will be the objective degree to which I, through my voluntary actions, can control the flow of information coming into my brain. And on the x-axis, I'll plot the slowness or fastness of this interaction. Now note, ideally, I want these axes to correspond to objective information theoretic measurements made on neural channels that a physicist would be able to come and measure objectively. Okay, now let's look at what I meant by saying it was a real exciting experience with my bicycle. I plotted in this red oval here because the control I have was partial only, okay? And it was fairly fast, okay? It was only partial because unpredictable things could happen. Notice that if I had complete control over what was going on, I would not call it an ongoing occurrent experience. In fact, it would be as though I knew already what I was doing. I knew any new scenery that would come into mind, would come into my eyes. It would just be like a form of knowledge, in a way, okay? If I had total control. And notice...
What does that mean? Total control over everything that came in through your visual system? Yeah, I find this stuff very obscure, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said, I think there's two issues here. One, about does it explain consciousness and live up to this grandiose, like, why are you framing it that way? Like, what's going on? But the other is this an interesting account of like mental qualities, whether they're conscious or not? I think obviously yes, but why assume that this gives us automatically an account of consciousness? I don't really understand, to be honest.
That if I had no control, if it was a completely automatic bicycle ride, like an Uber, I would just be there admiring the landscape. I would not be interacting with the bicycle. It would not be, perhaps I would not be experiencing the bicycle riding experience. I'd be perhaps experiencing the admiring the landscape experience, but it would not be a real bicycle riding experience.
Okay, but it would be an experience. So that's the question.
And of course, if the control I had was too slow, then I would not call it an current, ongoing experience. It'd be more like waiting for a phone call, for example. It'd be more like a state. Okay, now, this is the intuitive idea one gets from inspiration from bicycle riding. Okay, let's see whether these simple, naive ideas can be applied to all experiences, to emotions, perception, etc. So let's start with perceptual experiences. Let's start with vision. What kind of control do we have over the visual influx? Well, I claim we have partial control. Objectively, our control is partial. We have a good degree of control because the slightest voluntary movements of my eyes immediately cause an effect on the retinal image and thereby the retinal inflow. But if something happens in the visual field, it's out of my control. So I have this mixed kind of control. So it's a typical case of what I would judge to be an occurrent experience. And the same kind of thing can be said about audition, touch, taste, and smell. I've put taste and smell a little bit more to the left because it's slower, the interaction we have with sniffing and moving our tongues, than the immediate interaction we have by moving our eyes or our head. And then pain, itches, and tickles. These are even slower because they tend to be of more longer duration. The interaction is of a slower kind, so I put it more to the left. And also I put it a little bit lower down because I think we have less control over the sensory manifestations of pains, perhaps not so much for itches and tickles. By the way, everything I'm saying here is very qualitative. You may not agree with exactly where I'm putting these different experiences on my plot. The point is that one should theoretically be able to make such a plot, and I'm hoping that in the future physicists and information scientists will be able to actually make this more objective. This is just a qualitative scheme for the moment.
Well, this plot is interesting, but it doesn't... Maybe it's a step towards like kind of what he was talking about, this analytic phenomenology, or like an objective phenomenology, which I think is an important thing that we need. But I don't really see how any of this dissolves the hard problem. Yeah.
Now let's go and look at emotions like anger, fear, disgust, feeling sad and happy. Here also, these are much slower than pain, etc., like the current experiences, perceptual experiences, hunger and thirst also, and also they are much less under your voluntary control. And because of that, I've put them in this blue circle, and lo and behold, my prediction is that these should be perceived, these should be experienced as more state-like and less occurrent and ongoing and real and lived. Maybe we'll come back to whether they're real and lived a little bit later. And now what's really interesting is the prediction we make about proprioception. Proprioception is a sensory system just as complicated as vision and audition. Why did Aristotle not consider proprioception to be one of the 5 classic sense modalities? Why don't we feel proprioception the way we feel vision? This chart gives the answer. Proprioception is almost totally under your voluntary control. Proprioception measures the position of your limbs. You have the muscle spindles and the joint receptors that give immediate changes when you move your muscles, when you move your limbs voluntarily. However, it very rarely, or if ever happens, that you get proprioceptive input that has not been caused by your voluntary control. So you have almost complete control. So proprioception, as I predict from the chart, is perceived as a form of knowledge. You know where your arm is. You know what your posture is, but you don't feel it in an ongoing and current fashion.
Do you not feel it? I don't think I agree with that, but okay. So we have control over our bodies. I'm gonna have to come back and finish this in a little bit.